February 17, 1943. The North Atlantic, 300 miles southwest of Iceland. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Wolff stood in the conning tower of U-517, his gloved hands gripping the cold steel as spray froze against his weathered face. Below him, 43 men lived in a steel tube no wider than a railway car, suspended between sky and abyss. The Wolff pack had been successful. 5 merchant ships in 3 days, their broken hulls now resting 2 miles down in the dark. Wolff had commanded submarines for 2 years, and the pattern had become familiar. Hunt, strike, vanish. The convoy routes were rich with targets, and the Kriegsmarine had assured them that American shipbuilding could never match German U-boat production. But something had changed in recent weeks. Wolff had noticed it first in December. Ships that should have been blind somehow altered course before his boats could close. Convoys that should have scattered held formation with unnatural precision. And the destroyers. They arrived too quickly, searched too accurately, dropped their depth charges with disturbing certainty. His first officer, Oberleutnant Zur C. Frederick Adler, emerged from the hatch below, salt crusted in his beard. The younger man's eyes held the particular exhaustion that came from weeks submerged. Hydrophone reports propeller sounds bearing 270. Multiple contacts, sir. Another convoy. Wolff raised his binoculars. The Atlantic stretched gray and empty under low clouds. Distance? 12 kilometers. Speed 8 knots. The hydrophone operator counts at least 20 ships. 20 ships, enough tonnage to justify the risk. Wolff had orders to press the offensive, to starve Britain into submission by cutting the Atlantic lifeline. Every hull sent to the bottom brought the war closer to conclusion. That was what Berlin promised. That was what he had believed. He gave the order to dive and set an intercept course. U-517 slipped beneath the waves, and the world contracted to the red-lit pressure hull, the smell of diesel and unwashed men, the steady ping of the hydrophone counting down the distance to the convoy. What Wolff did not know, could not know, was that 300 miles away in a converted manor house outside London, a young woman named Julia Ashworth was reading his messages in real time. The mansion at Bletchley Park held no resemblance to a military installation. Its Victorian architecture and overgrown gardens suggested a country estate fallen on eccentric times. But behind the blackout curtains, in converted stables and hastily built wooden huts, 3,000 men and women waged a different kind of warfare. They fought with mathematics and logic, with pattern recognition and relentless analysis. They broke codes. Julia sat at her desk in Hut 8, a wool cardigan draped over her shoulders against the February cold. She was 24, her dark hair pinned back in the practical style adopted by most of the women analysts. Before the war, she had taught mathematics at a girls' school in Surrey. Now she intercepted German naval communications and extracted their secrets. The decrypt lay before her, rendered into English by the bomb machines that clattered in the adjacent building. UF-517 reporting position. UF-517 acknowledging orders. UF-517 preparing to attack convoy HX-229. She marked the coordinates on the plotting table and picked up the telephone connecting directly to the Admiralty's submarine tracking room. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. Confirmed. We have 3 destroyers within range. Thank you, Miss Ashworth. She replaced the receiver and returned to the stack of intercepts. Another U-boat reporting fuel status. Another requesting targeting information. Each message passed through the Enigma machine the Germans believed unbreakable. Each message emerged at Bletchley as plain text, its secrets laid bare. Julia had learned not to dwell on the human cost of her work. The submarines were hunting convoys. The convoys carried food, weapons, fuel. Men died either way. Her job was to ensure they died on the German side. What troubled her more was the persistent pattern she had noticed over the past month. The German Naval Command kept sending variations of the same query to their U-boat fleet. Equipment functionality, performance reports. Something about operational inconsistencies. The messages suggested confusion, perhaps suspicion. But the U-boats kept transmitting, kept using their Enigma machines, kept providing the Allies with their exact positions. Commander Evelyn Hartford entered the hut, her Wren uniform immaculate despite the hour. She was 41, a career naval officer who had helped establish the wireless intercept network across Britain. She scanned the decrypt log and nodded. Good work. How many boats are we tracking currently? 17 in the North Atlantic operational area, Julia said. 4 more in transit from Norway. UF-517 is moving to intercept HX-229. Not for long. Hartford's expression remained neutral. The destroyers will be in position within 2 hours. Julia hesitated. Ma'am, there's something odd in the recent traffic. The BDU keeps asking about equipment, malfunctions. They're questioning why so many boats are reporting the same technical issues. What kind of issues? They're not specific. But the pattern suggests growing suspicion. What if they realize we're reading their traffic? Hartford considered this. If they suspected the Enigma was compromised, they would change the entire coding system. The fact that they haven't suggests they're looking for mechanical explanations, not cryptographic ones. The Germans believe their machine is mathematically perfect. That certainty blinds them. She was right. Julia had studied the Enigma's specifications, understood its rotating wheels and plugboard, appreciated the astronomical number of possible settings. On paper, it should have been unbreakable. That it wasn't represented a triumph of mathematical analysis, technological innovation, and Polish intelligence officers who had provided crucial insights before the war. But it also represented something simpler, human error and institutional arrogance. The Germans had designed their perfect machine and then compromised it through predictable procedures, lazy operators, and standardized message formats. They began each message with weather reports following a template. They used common phrases that appeared in multiple contexts. They sent routine signals at scheduled times. These patterns gave the codebreakers their foothold, the perfect machine undone by imperfect humans. But there was something else, Julia knew. Something the Germans had not accounted for in their engineering specifications. Aboard UF-517, Wolff brought his boat to periscope depth. The convoy filled his view, fat merchantmen wallowing through moderate seas. 2 destroyers flanked the formation, but their positions suggested routine patrol rather than active searching. He had time for a careful approach, time to select his targets. "Bearing 265, he said quietly. "Range 4,000 meters. Make ready tubes 1 through 4. The torpedo officer repeated the order. Below, in the forward compartment, men checked firing solutions and opened outer doors. 4 torpedoes, 4 ships. If they moved quickly after the first salvo, they might reload and fire again before the escorts reacted. Wolff pressed his eye to the rubber cup of the periscope, calculating angles. The lead ship was a tanker, her hull riding high. Empty, returning from Britain. Behind her, 3 freighters heavy with cargo. Those were the targets worth dying for. "Solution ready, Herr Cappy." The torpedo officer's voice cut off as the boat shuddered. A tremendous crack echoed through the hull, and Wolff was thrown sideways as U-517 heeled to starboard. Emergency klaxons shrieked. "Depth charge," someone shouted. "Close aboard." But that was impossible. The destroyers were 4 kilometers away. Wolff had watched them through the periscope seconds ago. Another explosion, closer. The lights flickered. Somewhere aft, metal groaned under pressure. Wolff grabbed the periscope handle and swung it around, searching. There, bearing 090. A destroyer bow on, closing at flank speed. It had come from nowhere, from beyond the horizon, arriving at precisely the right position to bracket his boat. "Emergency dive. Take her down. Full ahead both engines." U-517 angled steeply downward. Wolff clung to the ladder as the deck tilted beneath him. Another depth charge detonated, further away this time. The destroyer had lost contact, but it had known. Somehow it had known exactly where to look. They leveled off at 200 meters and crept away at dead slow speed, silent running, every man frozen at his station. The destroyer's propellers thrashed overhead, back and forth, searching. After 20 minutes, the sound receded. After an hour, it faded entirely. Wolff ordered damage reports. A cracked fitting in the engine room, minor flooding in the aft torpedo compartment, nothing critical. They had survived. But the question burned in his mind like acid. How had the destroyer known? He had asked this question before, after the encounter with the corvette off Newfoundland, after the aircraft that appeared from empty sky and forced U-517 to crash dive, after the convoy that inexplicably altered course just as his boat reached firing position. Each time his radio operator assured him that all equipment functioned perfectly. Each time headquarters blamed bad luck or improved Allied radar. But Wolff had commanded U-boats long enough to know the difference between bad luck and systematic failure. The enemy was not guessing. The enemy was not relying on radar alone. The enemy knew. He found Adler in the control room studying the chart. "We need to break radio silence," Wolff said quietly. "We need to report this to BDU." "Report what, sir? That we were detected?" "That happens. The British have radar now. Better hydrophones." This was not radar. The destroyer came from over the horizon at exactly the right bearing. It knew where we would be. Wolff kept his voice low, and it's not the first time. Adler's expression shifted from fatigue to something harder. "You think there's a problem with the boat?" "I think there's a problem with the entire fleet. and I think headquarters knows it but won't admit it. 6 hours later, after they had put 100 kilometers between themselves and the convoy, Wolff composed his report. He kept it factual, stripped of speculation. Position, time, circumstances of the attack. Request for technical inspection upon return to base. He gave it to the radio operator to encrypt and transmit. The message traveled as electrical pulses through seawater, picked up by a German receiving station on the French coast, forwarded to U-boat command headquarters. But it also traveled in another direction. British intercept stations caught the transmission, recorded it, sent it to Bletchley Park. Julia decrypted it 18 hours later. She read Wolff's careful description of the attack, his request for inspection, his barely concealed suggestion that something was systematically wrong. She marked it on her log and added it to the growing file of similar reports. The pattern was undeniable now. U-boat commanders were questioning their equipment, their tactics, their entire operational doctrine. But they were asking the wrong questions. They examined their torpedoes, their engines, their diving mechanisms. They never examined their communications. The flaw that was destroying the U-boat fleet was not mechanical. It was procedural, human, cultural. It lived in the certainty that German engineering was superior, that the Enigma machine represented cryptographic perfection, that the enemy could never possess the mathematical brilliance required to break it. That certainty killed submarines. It killed them one by one, as destroyers appeared in impossible positions, as aircraft found boats that should have been invisible, as convoys scattered before attacks could develop. The Wolff packs were being hunted with their own tools, tracked through their own transmissions, destroyed by their own communications. And still they transmitted. Still they reported positions, described targets, requested orders. Each message another nail in their coffins. Each encryption another solved puzzle for the analysts at Bletchley Park. By March 1943, the pattern had become catastrophic. U-boat losses exceeded new construction. The convoy routes grew safer. The Atlantic balance shifted irrevocably. Wolff brought UF-517 home to Lorient on March 23rd. They had sunk one small freighter, expended most of their fuel-evading destroyers, and survived 4 separate depth-charge attacks. The returning crew looked hollow-eyed, aged beyond their years. On the dock, a Kriegsmarine technical officer met them with a clipboard. He asked about equipment performance, about unusual noises or vibrations, about torpedo functionality. He never asked about the Enigma machine. That device sat in its wooden case in the radio room, its 3 rotors and plugboard intact, its mechanical perfection unquestioned. Wolff filed his report and took leave in Paris. When he returned in May, headquarters had new orders. New patrol areas, new tactics, new targets. Nothing had changed. The brass still believed in ultimate victory through technological superiority. They still trusted their machines. U-517 put to sea again on May 14th. British naval intelligence tracked its departure, monitored its course, vectored destroyers into position. On May 19th, a depth-charge attack northwest of the Azores sent the boat to the bottom. All hands were lost. The war at sea continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Julia Ashworth remained at Bletchley Park until war's end, processing thousands of decrypts, each one a small piece of the puzzle that crushed the U-boat campaign. She never met Wolff, never saw U-517, never witnessed the consequences of her work beyond charts and statistics. The human cost remained abstract, necessary, justified by larger purpose. Years later, when the Official Secrets Act finally permitted disclosure, she would read accounts of the U-boat war and recognize the pattern she had helped create. The German submarines had been destroyed not by superior ships or weapons, but by mathematics and hubris, by the unshakable certainty that their encoding machines could not be broken, even as evidence of systematic failure accumulated around them. The devastating U-boat fleet, the Wolff packs that had nearly severed Britain's Atlantic lifeline, had been defeated by a simple design flaw. Not in their hulls or engines or torpedoes, not in their tactical doctrine or strategic deployment. The flaw lived in the space between certainty and reality, between the perfection of engineering and the imperfection of its application. It lived in every encrypted transmission that betrayed position and intention to listeners who should not have existed. The Enigma machine remained mathematically elegant, mechanically sophisticated, theoretically unbreakable. But elegance meant nothing when operators used predictable phrases, when procedures created patterns, when institutional arrogance prevented acknowledgement of systemic compromise. The perfect machine became a perfect trap, broadcasting secrets to an enemy that should have remained blind. By war's end, German U-boat losses exceeded 70%. More than 30,000 submariners died in steel coffins at the bottom of the Atlantic. Many of those deaths came directly from intelligence gathered through decrypted Enigma messages. The boats that should have been invisible had painted themselves with radio transmissions. The hunters became the hunted, tracked through their own communications, destroyed by their own certainty. The lesson remained sharp and unforgiving. Technological superiority, without humility, becomes vulnerability. Perfect security compromised by human error collapses into systematic failure. And the most devastating design flaw is often not in the machine itself, but in the minds of those who refuse to believe it could ever fail. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.